This is Coda Radio, episode 194 for February 29th, 2016. And welcome to Coda Radio, Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly talk show, taking a pragmatic look at the art and business of software development and related technologies. This episode is brought to you by our two fine sponsors, DigitalOcean and Linux Academy. I'll tell you more about those great sponsors as this here show goes on. My name is Chris, and unfortunately, our great, valiant host established on the East Coast is not joining us this week. No, folks. Mr. Dominic is out sick, and...
Inappropriate?
It would be inappropriate for me to tell you why, but I'll just say it's with valid reason that he couldn't make it today's episode. And he wanted to. 7 minutes before I went on air, I got an email from him saying, for good reason why he couldn't make it. And, it left me in a quandary because everybody knows about the news. February 24th, Microsoft, and specifically their cloud division, announced the acquisition of Xamarin, creators of Mono, something we've talked a lot about on this show. We got a lot of emails about it. We got a lot of tweets about it. We got some great submissions to our subreddit about it. So you guys are pretty hip to the story already. So there's no way I could sit here and do a show and walk back a year of logic with Mike about why we thought this was happening, if it's a good idea, what it means for opensource.net, and if it's a big blunder for Microsoft. There's no way I could do that without Mike being here. As they say, get it out of here.
Get the hell out of here. Get out of here.
Right. And of course,
get it out of here.
Get it out of here. That's got to go. So with Mike being absent, I thought, well, let's do something, maybe the next thing even better. To me, this actually feels like a pretty huge historical moment, not just in the context of Mono and Linux and all of that drama, but in a stake for what seems like the stakes are higher than ever for grabs for the future. You have Apple with Swift, obviously, Microsoft now with opensource.net, and their acquisition of Xamarin, which isn't just about Mono. It's not at all just about Mono. This is a huge deal. And so what we're going to do this week, since Mike couldn't make it, is we're going to take some of our coverage of Xamarin from the past, some of the good stuff, Mike working with the technology, trying to implement the technology, talking about Xamarin, talking about Microsoft and Xamarin, the rumors therein, all of that, give you sort of a recap of our Xamarin coverage, a recap. So that way next week in 195, when hopefully, universe be willing, Mike is feeling better. Next week in 195, when we get down and actually talk about this, you guys will be perched upon a overcliff of Coda Radio, reviewing all of our past Xamarin coverage like wise goats. What? Something like that. Close to that, at least. So the idea here is, with Mike out, let's go back. Let's do a retrospective of our Xamarin coverage, and then next week we'll hunker down and talk about this. And this would be, please do take this opportunity to send your thoughts in. Go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com/contact. This would be, choose Coda Radio from the drop-down. That's kind of a given. This would be an excellent opportunity to give you guys time to reflect on this news and comment on the show and do some great feedback on the show. We generally do 1 or 2 emails an episode because we want to be picky about the feedback that we cover in Coda Radio. So if you could send us in something about this that was thought-provoking, we would love to cover it. So you can email us directly, codaradio@jupiterbroadcasting.com, or use the contact form. And then join us live. Check the calendar. Hopefully Mike's going to be feeling up for it. We'll do an episode next week all about it. So this week, let's go back in time. And you know what? I have to be honest with you guys. I can't believe it. How long we've been talking about this. You can, obviously, by the emails and the tweets and all of that we've gotten from you guys. You guys can totally, I really appreciate it because you guys are totally like, when you email and you're like, you guys called it. And that is kind of rewarding because we have been talking about this for a while. So it's kind of cool that you guys acknowledge that. Anyways, I'll stop navel gazing for a moment. But let me just say this. According to your emails, you guys are on top of this already. So I really don't need to tell you any of this. But going back, it looks like at least since episode 40 of the Coda Radio program, we've been talking about this, which is just astounding, just absolutely astounding. So anyways, I hope you enjoy the retrospective of our Xamarin coverage, and then please tune in next week for our full coverage of it. At least I assume that's what we'll be talking about, unless the hoopla explodes next week and something else comes up. But I imagine this is what we're going to be talking about next week, so this is probably a great opportunity to reflect on previous moments in Coder Radio history.
All right, so Xamarin, which used to be Easel, which then became
MonoDevelop.
then got consumed by Novell, and they created MonoDevelop, and then broke out on their own and became Xamarin, right?
It's complicated, so it's not quite like that. Okay, so apparently it's called Xamarin, not Xamarin. I was corrected this week.
What a stupid name.
So I have to question their naming, because Xamarin sounds a lot better.
That's it. I'm done.
That's it? You're done with them?
He's a jackass.
No, it's fine. Okay, so it's supposed to be not what is it? Xamarin?
Apparently it's Xamarin.
Xamarin, okay.
Okay. So I have been playing with it for a little over a week now since it came out. It's interesting. I don't know how to say this nicely. MonoDevelop sucks. So, Xamarin has their own IDE now, which is great.
Wow, I've always heard MonoDevelop wasn't bad.
Oh, it sucks. I'm sorry. It's like, it's okay, like Xcode is okay.
Okay.
I might just be bitter, though, because Xcode is awful. Anyway, the Xamarin IDE is a lot nicer. But it really, Xamarin's focused not necessarily on mono, but more on the mono mobile aspects. And they've actually don't support a lot of the old mono development stuff. So like ASP.NET and basically that. But at a larger level, so remember, Chris, I think it was episode 4, we talked about write once, run anywhere.
Right. I mean, this has always been sort of the promise of mono, right?
Thank you, Mr. Roboto.
But their specialty is more like creating the bottom layer of the application, right?
So it's interesting what they're doing. So let's say you have model view controller, right? Your models and your controllers can be reused for, let's say you're doing a Windows Phone, iOS, and Android. Or more realistically, iOS and Android.
Okay. But
your views and maybe part of your controllers need to be rewritten from scratch for each. It's interesting, right? It's trying to get around the quote Android, the quote Java app look on the desktop. Right, so the idea is that a MonoDevelop app looks like a native app.
Because the front end is essentially native, right?
Right, it's a C# wrapper.
Yeah.
Well, it's a little complicated, but the way the API looks in iOS, there's a class called UI View Controller, and Mono in Xamarin. See, I'm still calling it Mono, which is great.
Is MonoDevelop dead now?
No, I think they're just separate now.
Okay.
Yeah. Which is a shame because this is a much better IDE.
Why would I want? Now, this is an honest question. I'm not trying to be stupid, but why would I want this over just using the tools available to develop for iOS? Is it just so that way I could leverage?
This is where I got a little lost. So one thing is, I generally work on a Mac, so having their IDE was great.
But this only works on a Mac, right? This says,
but they have a Visual Studio plugin. So they've always had the Visual Studio plugin. The Mac IDE is new, and I think it runs on Linux, but I'm not sure.
I know the chat room says it doesn't.
Oh, so it's Mac only.
Yeah.
Okay, but the IDE aside, right? Because that's not a huge deal. Most people, I get the sense most people using this are actually developing in Visual Studio.
Okay.
I'm not a huge .NET guy. I've certainly done some .NET. I recently shipped a project for the Windows Store. But I'm more than comfortable in Objective-C as well in Java. So I kind of had to ask myself, why would I either recommend this to someone when there is a licensing fee, or pick this for myself?
This, to me, I'm looking at the price. So their Enterprise Edition is almost $2,000. And
to be fair, though, most people are going to be fine with the Indie Edition if they're just a small-time client, and the Business Edition will do it for it's $1,000 off the top, whatever you're going to charge for consulting, or on top of that, I should say. Yeah, it's expensive, right?
Yeah, and I just think that what this to me sounds like is this is targeted at Windows developers who want to move their iOS app. They want to take their app and move it over to iOS, right?
Yeah, and I don't want to hit this too hard, but I get the sense it's targeted at people who've been in the .NET space for a while and are trying to move into something more, hip.
They're jumping ship and they need a bridge.
And they need a bridge, or maybe they're not necessarily jumping ship, but they, Objective-C is very foreign to them.
Right.
And while you're at it, you may as well get Android support. The problem I have is that, in theory, it's great. I mean, it's a good idea, right? The bottom layers of your app, so to speak, can be shared because the business logic is business logic, right? I mean, it's not a big deal.
No, it's just business.
Interacting with the server, fine. But then you have to rewrite all your views. And at least my experience writing mobile apps, especially on iOS, has been a lot of your QA issues and a lot of your time actually goes on that view layer. And that's where a lot of the cost goes. So you're duplicating that for two platforms. Now, if you're writing an app that's not super designed or doesn't have a lot of design or skeuomorphism going on, maybe it's not so bad, but I'm just thinking that's a lot.
Yeah. So you're now, this is not necessarily a bad thing, but what you're kind of saying there is this isn't really saving you on the part that takes the most time and energy. It's like you're able to, you can build the business end of it, and that is, great, but honestly, not as much work typically as the front end.
In my experience, that's true.
Right. I mean, gosh, I'm probably going to get a lot of hate for this, but the Xamarin guys remind me of the classic problem that we seem to have in open source, and that was their roots. They're no longer really so much, but I mean, I don't know what the licenses are.
Yeah, so so that's another interesting point. Not to sidetrack you, but so the Xamarin IDE is built on the mono-developed core,
right? But
they're very quick to say, "Oh, but don't worry, we built all the important parts."
Yeah.
So they're very. It's really an interesting.
Well, I think for certain elements of the Mac development community, open source has a real stigma. There's sort of an anti-source. Really?
Most Mac developers I work with.
I'm not saying they won't take advantage of open source and use it, but
I would say that free software has a stigma.
What was that editor, the Mac editor that went open source, and just about every big Mac head had a total kitten over it because, oh my God, it went open source, it's the end of the world. What was that?
TextMate 2.
Yeah. You see,
TextMate 1.
They hate open source.
They loved it. I mean, he got a beautiful write-up in ours. I hated it.
So my point is, though,
open source is the most important part.
These guys who come from an open source heritage, one of the classic problems is they really get off on infrastructure. Infrastructure this, infrastructure that, infrastructure. Right. So they have built the tool so that you can build your own ultimate portable infrastructure. And that is a needed market, but it seems like the reality is, like, if I was going to build an iOS app, I would just, I don't know why. If I'm only building for iOS, there really seems no point in using this. And if I'm only building for Android, there really seems no point in using this.
Okay, so this is where it gets a little messy, right? That was my question, but originally I saw this not as a tool for first-party development, but as for consulting. Because a lot of people call me and their budgets aren't quite where they need to be, right? So you need to, I'm sure you've had this in sysadmin too. And a lot of the times it ends up being that we go with something like PhoneGap, to kind of get into their range. At first, I was hoping this would be a faster PhoneGap, right? But I definitely understand why they want you to write the views twice, but that does add a significant cost in terms of time, which equates to money.
Now, it does mean you could sort of build up a library of some of this stuff and then you could then take something you wrote for an Android client and reuse some of this for the iOS version and save yourself time and make more money.
You could, but it's super unlikely. In my experience, it's always that last QA cycle where they start talking about design that things get hairy. Or that's where, if you were, under budget, that's where you hit your budget. And I just, I would love to be wrong, right? But I don't see how this is. I don't see how this is a game changer, particularly because of the licensing fee. So any of the costs saved to the client, we're then throwing $1,000 back on. Because if they're doing 2 apps, they have to have the business license.
So I think this is interesting because
it's a great idea, and if I was shipping an app that I wanted to be cross-platform, and for whatever reason I didn't want to go the HTML5 route,
like a video game.
Yeah. Well, so okay, it gets weirder, Chris. The relationship to this and mono game isn't exactly clear.
Okay, because it seems like the natural tie-in.
You can use them together, but you don't really.
I mean, that seems like the perfect use of the two.
Right. Mono game is great, but mono game is kind of its own. Mono game's kind of its own beast, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of things you have to consider even going the mono game route before you look at this.
And hi there. And with with Microsoft sort of sunsetting XNA, what's the real likely long-term future for mono game? Because mono game is an open source implementation of XNA.
Well, I think mono game's doing just fine. I mean, I'm following them on GitHub, and I'm constantly getting
I don't. But I mean, do you think 3 years from now people are going to create new games using mono game when the?
I think mono game is either going to go away, but I think more likely it's going to evolve out of its baby XNA or its XNA 2.0.
Come in, yeah.
Stack.
And
it's going to be its own thing,
yeah.
And XNA is going to be a distant memory.
That'd be interesting.
Or it'll fade because they have to, right? And looking, kind of following what they're doing, they kind of are doing their own thing now. Like they're not so worried about being XNA plus.
Okay, that's cool. I love they got Ouya support listed.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They're going in directions that certainly complicate the framework, though, right?
What I think is interesting about what Xamarin's doing is how aggressively they're going after the Mac market. So Miguel has come out and said, "Oh, I'm a Mac user. I've switched to everybody. I switched to the Mac. Yeah. You all should know this." Of course, he did it years ago. In fact, remember there's just a hoopla not too long ago, and it was right in there. He was a Mac user.
Why he didn't like the Linux desktop anymore. I think.
But they're also buying ads on a lot of Mac publications like daringfireball.net. So they bought, and here's their ad read. Xamarin blends the iOS and C# world together in only a way that seasoned iOS developers accept. Raw access to every iOS API combined with all of C#'s great features and functional style programming, language integrated query, and seamless processing of XML, JSON, and web services. And that's sort of their I think the key words in that pitch are seasoned iOS developers, raw access to every iOS API,
right?
And I think that I think those are sort of like the key points they want to hit on in this what is really a 1-paragraph sales pitch that they probably paid $6,500 for. What?
It's I don't know how closely you follow iOS developer publications.
Not very.
There is one language iOS devs, exception of me and a few others, really don't like. That language would be Java. So one of the reasons you sometimes from indie developers won't see them go to Android, or like Marco Arment did, will just contract out the Android version, is because they just don't want to deal with it. And that's fair enough. I have to say, when I left my early job working Java and freaking Eclipse all day, I did not want to write any more Java for a while.
Well, is this maybe the opposite then? Is this for iOS developers who want to abandon ship and move over to Android?
No, I'm sorry, you can't ship a product like Xamarin without getting iOS on board.
Right, but I mean, let's be honest, Android's kind of blowing up. I mean, maybe people want to move their iOS apps over.
Android's blowing up, but I mean, very anecdotally, because I haven't done a study, but I can only tell you what I've seen in the last year or 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. When someone comes to me with a budget for an iOS project, they're far closer to being reasonable than they are with Android. And
what do you mean in terms of cost?
In terms of cost, in terms of, they're hiring a designer. When they go for iOS, they've really got a nice tier designer.
Well, I mean, that's all going to change with time, right? Don't you think?
Maybe. I mean, I think sure it will get better.
Like, did you see this post from the Pocket Cast guys that was linked to us on Google Plus? Where basically,
yeah, and their post makes a lot of sense because why the hell would they want to compete with Apple?
Right, but they're saying we're seeing 4x the sales rate on Android than we are, and of course that makes sense. There's a very competitive podcast client market on iOS, and plus Apple has their own, and Listen's dead on Android. But I that is not the first post I've seen where they've said we're seeing 4x, 5x. There was another blog post recently that says we release on Android first because we have more sales there now.
So you're conflating a few things though, right? So the developers often see the next trend before the biz devs and investors do.
Sure.
A lot of these folks are just throwing money into iOS and are just throwing money into tablet apps. So Android definitely has room to grow. But if Xamarin didn't get some serious iOS support, iOS and Mac developer support, it wasn't going to go anywhere. Android wouldn't be enough because a lot of iOS developers who are contractors, do moonlight as Android developers. I mean, basically that's what I do, right? I do mostly Mac and iOS now with some, although Chris, to be honest, HTML5 has been
blowing up.
We should talk about it.
It's what your most recent couple of gigs have been all about, right?
Well, I mean, so it's interesting. I've been writing a lot of native components with tying into HTML5. But yeah, HTML5 has certainly grown for me. It's definitely grown faster than native Android did.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I mean, yeah. I guess I'm pleased because then everybody gets to have fun, right?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I can type, input type equals date, and it just does it for me now. When, 10 months ago, that wasn't the case, right? You needed a crazy PhoneGap plugin to do that. So I'm very happy with the way things have gone with WebKit. And I say WebKit in particular because, use WebKit.
Microsoft has just sent us an email and said that they feel like you should check out Internet Explorer for mobile, and they would appreciate it if maybe you could reconsider.
If I would just stop doing TAC WebKit, even when it doesn't need it, just kind of I would just throw it everywhere.
Right.
I don't actually do that. People who are going to rage me out in the emails.
So, no. Any kind of wrap thoughts to just sort of wrap up the Xamarin?
Yeah, I don't mean to poo-poo it. I think it's an interesting idea. Architecturally, it is a great way to develop an app. But to pitch it to a client versus HTML5, when they don't have a budget is going to be hard. Or if they do have a budget, and they really are interested in the best user experience, pitching this versus double native, so native on each platform, is also questionable to me.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to see, maybe if you're developing an indie app for yourself and you're going to sell it, yeah, maybe that would make a lot of sense, because then the indie license is only $300 instead of $1,000.
Yeah, their prices are a little high for the bigger stuff, but for the average Joe, I guess it's not too prohibitive.
I mean, to their credit, their prices used to be higher and used to be able to not start for free. Now they're letting you start for free. So, or you kind of could start for free before. One other key that we haven't discussed, maybe we'll discuss it next week, is Mono Mac, which they're pushing pretty hard. Which I think is a non-starter, but
yeah, I mean, whatever. It just that does.
If you're writing a Mac app and you're going to put it on the Mac App Store and you're not writing it in Cocoa, that's.
I'd be curious if people think I'm wrong, but it seems to me possibly Mono. I mean, with HTML5 taking off and all this kind of stuff, maybe they're trying to solve last year's problem.
Well, I will say within from the last 2 years, HTML5 has come from I thought it was so slow it wasn't viable, right? To I've shipped already several products on it this year. The year is very young.
Yeah, a lot of that's because of improvements in WebKit and Chrome and efforts from Google.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, if you just cap Android, say 2.3.3 or better, you're okay. And the same thing for iOS. If you say 5.0 plus, your JavaScript is going to be good enough, right, to get away with it.
All right, Mr. Dominic, why don't we shift gears and talk about Build? It just wrapped up last week, a Build 2014. Microsoft made some big announcements. They said they're open sourcing their .NET compiler and their whole platform, Roslyn, right? This is huge, right?
I don't even know what this means. I put on Twitter last night that I thought it was a big deal. Some folks have questioned, well, why does it matter? I think this is huge, right? I mean, one of the biggest complaints out of Xamarin has been since Microsoft only selectively open sourced .NET before.
Right.
They had to kind of guess. I mean, at the minimum, this is going to be huge for Xamarin developers. At the minimum.
I think this is a really big deal. Now, I think most of it's under an Apache license.
It's very permissive.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people are saying this is a response in, trying to stay relevant while they still can. I really like Mary Jo Foley's take on this. Jo Foley wrote, over on ZDNet. She wrote a piece after she talked with some guys behind the scenes, and she's always really good at kind of getting the root of the Microsoft story. She's one of my favorite Microsoft followers. And, I think one of the things, Mike, that has been talked a lot about with some of these most recent announcements, and I'm including like Office for the iPad and now the open sourcing of a lot of the .NET platform. A lot of people are saying, oh, it's Satya Nadella. In fact, over the weekend, I wrote a piece from Business Week that said, in 5 days, Satya Nadella has turned Microsoft around and transformed the company. And that was the headline. And implying that he got it, Ballmer stepped out and Satya sat down and went, know what I'm going to do? Office for the iPad. Know what else I'm going to do? Open source .NET. And just snapped his fingers. Come on.
Ballmer gets a bad rap, right? Ballmer... It's silly to think. Now, it's possible that they held the iPad versions of Office and they held open sourcing this, A, for build, and B, to give the new CEO something to show, because for the media, that's a great narrative, right?
It's already building, yeah.
Yeah, and it helps them build this story.
Mike, if that is true, it would be one of the most brilliant maneuvers we have seen out of Microsoft in the last 5 years.
It's pretty obvious it is, right? Those iPad apps had to take a very long time to develop. I can tell you as an iOS developer, the quality and the feature richness, that certainly wasn't done in 5 days.
No, of course not. In fact, so Mary Jo was talking to Soma Smozengir. Oh, boy, that's awful. But he's the corporate vice president of Microsoft's developer division, so he's the guy that would know. He told Mary Jo at Build last week that they have been working around open sourcing more of .NET for the last 3 years. They've been working on this. In fact, the Xamarin guys have been flying out there, partnering with Microsoft, and they were a key advisor in all of this. Now, which is interesting because some inside Microsoft were initially quite leery of Xamarin's goal to help the .NET developers write apps that worked on Android and iOS because they felt like those platforms were competing with Windows. But over time, more and more people inside Microsoft saw Xamarin more as friend than foe, and they started listening to these guys. And so they started saying, okay, well, if we're going to open source these, how do we need to do it? How do we engage with the community? And according to what Mary Jo got, this has been 3 years in the work, and Xamarin in the last few months has been really coming in and kind of closing up the deal, which might be why we've seen a lot of these acquisition rumors floating around.
Yeah. I don't know what to think. I mean, the legal implications of them opening source this took more than, 2 months, right?
For sure.
The idea that this is all Satya coming in and being like, I'm changing everything.
Superman!
Yeah, it's just not true, right?
No.
I mean, we're not going to see what his policies are for at least another 3
This is the litmus test for actual journalists versus the armchair journalists. Like when you see him writing these Satya's changed the company in 5 days headlines, add that one to your armchair journalist list.
You know what he's probably changed? He's probably changed his office, I'm sure, quite a bit. And he's probably maybe changed a few cultural things.
I wouldn't be surprised if some of the recent Azure price adjustments weren't, coming from his office.
Well, but he was also the head of Azure.
Exactly.
So certainly, and maybe changing the name from Windows Azure to Microsoft Azure.
I could see that too.
But even that, because again, they've had so many problems with names.
Yeah.
There had to be some sort of legal review.
Right. Yeah.
I don't.
Well, the chat room thinks this is Microsoft taking on Java. The chat room says that with them open sourcing C#, it's a full-on shot at Java, and some people in the chat room are speculating that this is going to eventually this is going to leave Java in the dust.
Well, so that's interesting. I mean, I'm a fairly notorious Java fan, and I would say that there are a number of things in C# that are frankly better. The idea that someone else would take C# other than Xamarin and do an implementation that could compete with Java is, I'm trying to think of who would want to do it. Unless Xamarin decided to get into the whole full stack and offer like a web services and ASP.NET equivalent, which is also open source, so I guess they could at this point.
Yeah.
But the mono runtime has never been great.
Yeah, I think this is a pretty big deal, and it's part of an overall, I think what they're trying to do is, I think Microsoft is actually fully come to terms with, all right, we de-emphasize the individual platforms, we emphasize the infrastructure, the back-end services, and .NET plays into that. They created the .NET Foundation as part of all of this to foster open development and collaboration with the community. That seems like a really big deal. This is a serious commitment on their part. It's maybe not my favorite license in the world, but it's a real license that people can use. It's not some made up thing.
So it's interesting because I released my open source under Apache 2. What's your issue with Apache 2?
I probably, I'm not a big licenses person to begin with. Here, I usually fall into the camp of stuff. Either is usually BSD licensed, which is close to Apache, or GPL.
That's pretty similar.
Yeah, or GPL. And it just depends on what it is and what license is best for it. So I
think that makes sense. I mean, if you look at it, and from my perspective, I'm usually open sourcing little toolkits, little utility kits that I've used that I use in sometimes CodeJournal or other internal projects, or stuff I just do on the weekends to use in client projects later.
I've watched GPL. So I had an old friend who had a really great product for schools that was GPL. He had somebody come along and take it up. And they did some really cool work with it and really impressed upon it. But they built 20% of their solution on top of his whole stack, and they kind of put him out of business. But because of the GPL, he was able to get that code back, make his project and product better, and he was able to sort of have a rebound, and also then built out his own new niche. He sort of pivoted and created a new niche using some of their improvements. And I watched him go on this yo-yo cycle of like, oh man, I'm devastated. They just took my own code and just put me out of business. Oh wait, I'm benefiting from them modifying my code. Now I have a new market opportunity. And he sort of came back. Like it was like a comeback scenario. And I thought, wow, it sort of saved him that he got that code back when he put it out there like that. And so I can see, there's good uses for all different types of licenses. And I think that the fact that it's not some sort of Microsoft shared code license.
Yeah, I mean, that would be a non-starter
right
for me.
Yeah, exactly. That's the deal breaker, and it's not that. It's a serious commitment, and that's what I get from it.
I mean, I'm gonna alienate some people here, but even the Ubuntu contributors thing makes me a little
right. Yeah.
uneasy.
The CLA is, it's very controversial. Hold that thought right there. I'm going to thank DigitalOcean for a second, because now that I think about it, Mike, it's pathetically almost gotten to the point where what I need more than anything else is Chrome on any desktop. And if I couldn't use Linux, with Chrome, I might have to switch. Before we go into that, and then also we have a lot more coming up. This is a packed episode. This is the first topic. So let me tell you about DigitalOcean. Use the promo code CODERDIGITAL. And get yourself a $10 credit over at DigitalOcean. Man, the world's #2 hosting provider now. That is amazing to watch them grow. And there's rumors about a new data center opening soon. I'm sure I'll tell you about that when we hear more.
New Jersey.
I don't think it's New Jersey. I think it's more like India. But we'll wait and see.
For all your Bruce Springsteen and Bon Jovi hosting needs.
It would be very convenient for Mike. So just think about it, DigitalOcean. It could be big. So what is DigitalOcean? It's your way to go spin up a machine on demand that is super fast, a great value, and really easy to manage, but not dumbed down. It's very clever in the way they've actually designed the interface. And man, does it work great. Use the promo code CODERDIGITAL to get a $10 credit. You can get started in less than 55 seconds, and pricing plans start at only $5 a month. You can get 512 megabytes of RAM for that. A 20 gigabyte SSD, because they're all SSDs. It just goes up from there. A blazing fast CPU and a terabyte of transfer. And DigitalOcean has data center locations in New York, San Francisco, Singapore, Amsterdam, London, Toronto, Germany, and who knows, a new one may be coming soon. But it's that interface. I'm not going to lie. When I first heard about DigitalOcean, everything besides the interface impressed me. Linux, KVM, SSDs, 40 gigabit E connections out to the entire world, great locations for the data center, unbelievable price. Okay, that's all pretty good. Then I started spinning up my first droplet. Then I became basically, if I could marry and have DigitalOcean's child, I would. It would be a beautiful droplet human hybrid, and I would be proud of that. Because that interface is that good. I'm committed to that interface. That's how good that is. That's a good interface. It's really good. And they have a straightforward API. So if you don't want to use the interface, you can write some code to do some stuff or take advantage of a lot of code that already exists. Or just sort of be like a consumer of it on the front end. You choose your distro, and they have Ubuntu, CentOS, Debian, Fedora, CoreOS, or FreeBizzle. And then you can use their API sort of not even really intending to, because they will use it to deploy applications or entire stacks for you. I want to emphasize that if you're going to be deploying software in Docker, I want you to seriously consider starting with DigitalOcean's base Ubuntu 14.04 Docker image. It has prerequisite software preloaded for you. It's pulling Docker from the official Docker repos and not from the Ubuntu repos, which is a common mistake. They've integrated the GPG signatures from Docker so you make sure you're getting the right stuff. Future updates come right from upstream the way Docker wants you to get them. But the best part is, if you need to just sort of go back to basics, one click, it resets the machine right back, Ubuntu base, Docker, all that stuff. I did a Docker Nginx base, but you can mess around with this stuff. And then you just redeploy your images, your Docker containers to it, and you are literally up in seconds. A fully, you know what? You just have any issues you don't want to have to hassle with. The fact that you can go in there and click a button, it wipes out the OS and reloads the base OS with just the packages you need. But the stuff it keeps is like the little stuff you don't want to have to set up again. Like any of the networking settings you've set in there, or any of the backup settings you've set up in there, or like the DNS stuff. None of that stuff has to be redone. So it is a real quick reset right back to basics. You redeploy the container and you are up and going. I did it 3 or 4 times when I was setting up Rocket Chat for LAS, and because I wanted to have a valid, known good config that I could review from. And anytime I got a little iffy or things went off the rails or something, I was like, you know what? There's no reason to kind of have a sort of wiggly, iffy kind of feeling in the back of my mind. Reset, redeploy, back up and running in seconds. Use the promo code CODERDIGITAL. Go check them out, DigitalOcean.com. And a big thank you to DigitalOcean for sponsoring the Coder Radio program.
All right, Mike. So I almost feel like we've been accidentally building to this topic over like the last 3 weeks. So we talked maybe even the last 4 weeks, because first we talked about Material and what Google's trying to do with design and how Material's sort of their attempt to kind of make Android have a unified look that works in multiple different form factors. Then we talked about building interfaces and the tools that are available for that and how much they suck. And then you had a blog post, or at least, I don't know if you wrote it, but, it was on your blog over at dominicm.com. You wrote up a review of the Xamarin. Is it the entire suite, or are you just looking at the forms aspect in this review?
So this review is actually just looking at vanilla Xamarin. So this gets a little weird.
Lay it on me.
Xamarin has 2 very different offerings. One is what in the past was just called Xamarin, which is basically this is a gross oversimplification, right? But basically a C# wrapper around native iOS and native Android APIs. And that one, we were talking about the user interface tools before. That one actually uses the storyboard files out of iOS and uses the same Android layout files. Very much just say, do you know C#? Do you want to do mobile? Let's do it, right? Some limited code sharing, but not a ton using classic Xamarin. Then there's this new offering called Xamarin Forms, which is totally different.
Okay.
This review is only of Xamarin, and the reason for that is Xamarin Forms is incredibly new.
Okay. That makes sense.
And I am doing some work with it, but, I mean, just kind of a full disclosure thing. It's so new that when you're working with it, you're talking to the developers working on it kind of thing.
Okay.
And they're saying there's things that they haven't finished yet, there's stuff like that. Xamarin Forms is certainly not something you're going to want to ship in your enterprise unless it's like a Skunkworks project just yet.
Well, I'm kind of, in a way, I feel like maybe this is an opportunity. I'm curious to hear what you have to say about it because I think being just fully honest with you is I hold multi-level biases towards Xamarin, and I think kind of some of that comes from like real basic, where I've seen like, yes, we can create something that's not from the native SDK and IDE, and we'll build it out into a binary that you can drop on that platform. It'll be just like it made it in Xcode, just like that, only not quite. And then you go to actually use it, and it's crap. So I've got like this bias towards these. Build it in the this completely foreign language, so in this case maybe, and I could be completely misunderstanding, but you write something in C#, but the target platform they expect you on that platform to use, the target language is Objective-C. So you're not it's almost like you're sneaky. You're getting away with something a little bit. You're sneaking it past the cops and submitting this app that you made with the outlaw development environment. I'm kind of exaggerating the bias, but that's what I conjure up when I think of Xamarin.
I mean, I am right on the hater train with you, and software written in real basic, software written in even some of the old Java GUI kits were terrible, right?
Yeah,
one might argue that Java FX is also terrible.
Oh,
but so the road to Xamarin. I mean, we've been doing Xamarin for actually several months now. And the road to Xamarin was kind of, Chris, do you remember dating in high school?
Yeah.
It started with a little bit of a look in a hallway.
Yeah.
Maybe a quick chat at a locker. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I
here.
dialed in that the band geeks were definitely the low-hanging fruit for a computer nerd. What? No, I mean, but band girls need love too, man. It's not a disservice. I was answering a market need. What? Come on.
The true capitalist. Anyway, my point is this has been something of a long flirtation.
Yeah.
And it's why, some of the folks writing in, I won't say complaining, but I will say bitching, that we haven't covered any technical tools was because I wasn't sure that I wanted to discuss Xamarin, because I know sometimes people take everything I discuss as like a super endorsement and kind of get pissed off when it doesn't work out for them. So I kind of played it cool, right?
You wanted to kind of...
Well, I wanted to be sure I liked it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Xamarin is a tool that solves a problem. Now, the problem we've been having is we get lots of people who call and say, hey, Fingertip, we want an app, we want it on both platforms. We really don't have the budget, right? Now, we flirted with various HTML5 solutions. We've done projects, we've shipped successful projects in various HTML5 solutions. But there's just something about the HTML5 solutions that never really satisfied me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the one that you probably heard of the most is PhoneGap, and PhoneGap is not something we recommend. It's just not good, right? When you're doing a PhoneGap project, you're shooting for almost okay. Like, that's the top you're going to get. Titanium is better. The folks over at Telerik have something that's pretty interesting. But again, when we tried it out, it was very immature. So I've always, so we have a market problem of people want dual platform apps, right? And I'm using the phrase dual platform rather than cross intentionally.
So by dual, do you mean iOS and Android? So not like iOS and web or Android and web?
No.
That's a little depressing, but okay.
Well, to be fair though, right, your mileage may vary. I mean, Fingertip Tech has a reputation for mobile solutions.
True, right, right. Yeah.
We haven't done, we've done a lot of web work, but a lot of it's of that silent subcontracting kind of crap where we can't show it. So.
Right, no, that makes sense. You're known, you kind of got a reputation for that particular area, so that's...
In fact, I can't tell you how many times another vendors ended up doing the web application just because our customer didn't know we did it.
Right, yeah, yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, there is a level of self-selectingness to this, where if you're in a general interactive agency or web development company, Xamarin probably doesn't make a lot of sense for you, right? I mean, if you're a pure HTML5 shop, Xamarin is probably not the way to go.
Sure.
So anyway, we have this problem where we have, we've also been getting a lot more, let's say, line of business type work rather than consumer. or maybe it's consumer, but it's consumer for one specific industry, right? It's like prosumer kind of stuff.
Okay.
Where you're not so worried about gradients of wood, which thank God Apple killed on iOS 7. And you're not really shooting for the TechCrunch reading crowd, right?
Right.
You're shooting more for, we're in this trade and all my guys need to carry this and do their job.
It needs to be functional,
It needs to be on both platforms.
Yeah.
And this is my budget.
Okay.
So double native is incredibly expensive, right? And there's this, in my mind, this fallacy of, the development cost in double native is expensive. It is. But if you're doing two totally native code bases separate, the big cost is going to be that maintenance cost, right? You have to maintain both platforms totally independently of each other. So we got into a way of, we have this certain class of customer. Now we still offer native development. There's still a lot of customers who take us up on native development. But we have this certain group of customers, for very good business reasons, right? Because of what they're doing, need a dual platform, somewhat more cost-sensitive solution. That's where Xamarin kind of comes in.
And I would imagine, too, oftentimes this is probably something that ties into maybe something that's a specific application that's unique to their industry, or something that's semi-common, like a Salesforce backend or something like that.
We're not cloning Instagram and Xamarin.
Right. It's stuff that, like, there's some database stuff you're going to have to be able to do, right? That kind of thing.
Whatever. A lot of it's like interacting with their internal service.
Yeah. Yeah, their backend, you've got to be able to search something and pull up a result from their database.
It's more B2B. I feign to use the word enterprise because these companies aren't, enterprise big, but
okay, yeah,
it's more business prosumer than consumer. These apps we're doing. Again, not all of them. We still do consumer apps. This is just a growing segment of.
Yeah, actually, I mean, I could honestly see pretty easily. Like a lot of this stuff, it's interesting. A lot of our equipment now has an API in a way. So like our mixer and the lights and a few other things can all be controlled. Like they all have APIs available to them, and we could have like a Jupyter Broadcasting automation app that talks to this stuff. And I would maybe in theory be able to have like, modes you go into, last mode, Coder Radio mode, and it would then send like a universal remote. It would probably work just as well too.
Right.
But and we're not some big enterprise, but that as these technologies kind of just become more common, I could see us wanting to do something like that.
Right. And from a cost perspective, some of these companies are actually allowing people to bring their own device rather than purchase, let's say, 200 iPads because it's cheaper, right? You don't have to buy the device. Yeah. The problem is you have to then potentially support Android as well, or vice versa, right? Because let's be honest, a lot of enterprises, at least of the size we're dealing with, are buying cheap Android devices rather than iPads, purely out of a cost-cutting perspective. So I'm going to get into some of the more technical stuff on Xamarin in a minute. I just kind of want to go over the case for it, but there is some code sharing. There are some nice little tricks you can do. So the other argument, the other business case we've been able to make for it is, hey, 200-person company, you're not huge, but you have like a 4-person IT department, right? Guess what technology your IT department probably already is familiar with?
.NET.
Right. C#.NET.
Yeah.
Again, theoretical overall cost of ownership is significantly lower in that case, right?
Well, because, even if it's sort of, I could see that making such a difference if they're just, that's the name of something they've heard of before. Like even just that makes a difference. Oh, C#? Yeah, we know what that is.
Right. I mean, in the earlier Coder Radios, I recounted the stories of convincing IT managers that, using an Apple device wasn't going to bomb their Exchange network, right?
Yeah.
So there's certainly a let's say brand recognition quality to C#.
Yeah.
And now we're not going to talk about this today too, but C# is actually a phenomenal language. Just gonna let that one slide for now.
Proprietary software is not ethical.
It's actually open source now.
Then your description is not accurate.
Wow.
What happens to you is not sufficiently important to justify the wrong you're doing.
Yes, it is. I'm evil.
What's wrong with that?
Exactly.
This is egregious.
right, I'm all done. That was our RMS update. All right, so continue on, sir. This is fascinating to me and actually quite illuminating.
So quick recap, right? Cost, BYOB, which doesn't necessarily mean all those devices are going to be Android or iOS. They're probably going to be some combination of both. And familiarity to IT, which is probably the most important thing on this list, right? If you can't get through to the IT manager, or even worse, if there's just one IT guy, you can't make the sale. And I'm sure Chris would tell you the same thing. Right?
I agree 100%, yeah.
Like if you can't sell the guy in the technology you're using, even if you do manage to make the sale, he's just going to create roadblocks.
I definitely, during my career, I think it's really interesting as somebody who does the Linux Action Show too, is I witnessed the arc of I lost the deal because I wanted to use Linux, and then I would have to sort of like learn to like sort of pivot on my feet and be like, oh yeah, we could do it on Windows. And then like that arc finally concluded when I was leaving sort of the consulting gig as you win by selling it on Linux. Yeah, that runs on Linux. Yep, it'll run. Yep, we can do that on Linux. Yeah, oh yeah, that'll be no problem. Like, so it was a very fascinating thing because for a long time there was this sort of visceral bad reaction, especially in the area I was working at because it was at that time in the education sector and there was a lot of money coming in from Microsoft. Sure. So there was like an extra little bit of preference towards Microsoft. And then as I kind of expanded out from there, I witnessed sort of the general shift in perception from IT departments to more and more over time started asking for Linux. You know, can you do that with Samba? You know, those kinds of things. That was really fascinating to me to watch because then all of a sudden it became a market advantage to be able to say yes to that. Whereas when I started in my career, it was a market disadvantage.
You know, it's funny. I actually recently lost the sale because I wouldn't do something in Swift.
Swift?
Because I'm afraid to ship Swift to a customer because it's not a 1.0 language, and you know the syntax can change.
Now, how does that is that even a thing yet?
Apple has managed to advertise Swift to non-developers to the point where super middle management. You know, I'm the random finance official from this company who's been designated the project manager for their company. It's like, oh, but we need Swift.
Someone who considers them like, I'm an iPhone enthusiast.
Well, it's funny. Apple has managed to somehow create this sense to non-technical folks that by your app being written in Swift, it will somehow be better.
Wow,
even though Swift is not finalized as a language in terms of syntax or APIs or anything.
You know what that is, right? That is the strength and currency of brand that Apple has.
It's horrifying. Like,
that's amazing, and it sort of just switches off the critical thinking area of people's brains.
Yeah, we ended up not being able to close the sale because, you know, I'm sitting there, I'm saying, well, we could do it in Swift, but you know, what if Apple changes this syntax or something crazy midstream in this project?
Let me tell you about my friend C#, and they said no thanks.
Well, we were actually saying, let me tell you about my friend Objective-C, which worked fine for 20 years. My grandpa could have done this in Objective-C, kind of like. But it's just funny how, for these middle management pseudo-technical types, if they get a name in their head that they recognize as good, regardless of if their argument is based on reality, you have to sell into it, or you just can't sell.
So do you think that C# has as much negative baggage associated with it as it has positive baggage, or do you think it's all pretty much like when you come in there and saying you're dropping things like the C# bomb and Xamarin and iOS and Android in the same sentence, are people like receptive to that, or are they like, I know Xcode, I know about Objective-C. What's the reaction?
So outside of our little nerd bubble, there's a couple important things. No one knows who Miguel de Icaza is or what Mono was.
Right.
So there's no baggage.
Yeah.
Everybody knows, and more importantly, every IT manager will sign off on C#.
Right.
And that's
the Microsoft brand right there.
Right, and it's unfortunate.
I don't know. In business, I mean, Microsoft has a really strong brand for kind of steady as it goes for business.
Well, I think it's unfortunate because in a lot of ways, the C# systems or the .NET systems these companies are deploying or have previously deployed, Xamarin is a lot more modern than them, right? So there's still a little bit of a disconnect there.
Okay.
because you're running your 2003 Microsoft Server application.
Yeah.
You're still behind the ball, right? You're still not exactly where you want it to be.
Yeah, for sure.
I was very apprehensive about even getting involved with Xamarin at all, just because a lot of our customers are historically the people striving to be on TechCrunch or the well-funded incubators, right? And Microsoft is a dirty word over there.
Mm-hmm.
So is C#. Yeah, huge package. But anyway, it is not the be-all and end-all, but it is another tool in the belt. And I think, Chris, I should tell you how it's being used.
Yeah, I'd be curious.
So the shtick with Xamarin is not the Java write once, run everywhere thing, first off. So get it out of your head. And we're talking about vanilla Xamarin, right? We're not talking about Xamarin Forms just yet.
So it is not write once, run everywhere.
No. If you read my review, I talk a lot about the tooling. Long story short, the tooling on Mac, Xamarin Studio is phenomenal. Visual Studio integration is great, but extremely expensive.
Right.
And the Xamarin Studio on Windows is a piece of shit. And it's very clear that they assume that if you're on Windows, you can afford the Visual Studio license.
Oh, okay. So I know this isn't your main point, but I wanted to ask you specifically, because this seems to be, and because I read your review, and what I got from this, to me, I think long-term, one of the problems that's going to eat away at you is this particular issue. So how about before we discuss that, I want to mention Linux Academy, because they're doing some cool stuff. And we're talking about learning new languages. We're talking about increasing our skill sets. And we're talking about ways you can improve yourself, and that's definitely linuxacademy.com. linuxacademy.com/coders, too, is a place to go to get $5 off a month. linuxacademy.com/coders. Now, what is Linux Academy, my friends? This is really awesome. A group of extremely enthusiastic Linux users who have a background in education said, we have the ability to build the platform, provide the content. Let's go create something that people can subscribe to and they can learn on their own with comprehensive study guides that you can download offline in video and audio. They have 7+ supported Linux distributions where the courseware adjusts to the distro that you choose. And they're always adding new things. That's why the monthly service makes so much sense. They're constantly getting better. They have an entirely new course called the OpenStack Essentials. It's 100% complete, and it's available at Linux Academy right now. You can get started on OpenStack and become an expert. They also have some live sessions as well. So a lot of times they'll have complimentary content that goes with things like these OpenStack courses, where they'll do live Q&As, and you can ask them about that. So you can go directly to the expert, and hey, if you've got something even after you've gone through the courseware that you're still wondering about, they have these sessions available. And the brand new AWS Certified SysOps Administration Prep course has really come together with 14 hours, and actually, I think it might actually be 15 hours of content now. I'm logged in right now over here at linuxacademy.com, and I fired up the AWS Certified SysOps Administrator Associates level. And what's great is right here at the beginning of the screen, if you're watching the video version, you can see all the details you're going to need to know to plan this. And then you just take it at your own pace. So this says module length is going to be 14 hours. What's really awesome is it actually breaks it down by each individual section. So I know, it's 14 hours total, but look, this section is 7 minutes. This section is 4 minutes. This section here is 17 minutes. Well, okay, you know what? I can set aside about 40 minutes and do a couple of these. And then I can take some of the courseware with me and process it while I'm commuting using their audio files as I go, and then come back and resume. And then I see exactly where I can stop, test myself, and continue on. Linux Academy is continually getting better, and they're always adding new things. They have virtual machines integrated with the courseware, so as you get to a point where you need to do something, they spin up a virtual machine on the background for you. Now, the really cool thing is, when you're doing AWS, they're also doing that for you. So you don't have to worry about paying AWS or signing up and getting all the key crap. And then you still get to go on and experiments on the actual production AWS infrastructure, because that's what they're running on top of. And you do real-world scenarios. linuxacademy.com/coders. Go there. Just visiting them and checking them out lets them know you appreciate them supporting the show. But I think really, if you've been sitting around and thinking maybe there's something a little more you could be doing, maybe go check them out. linuxacademy.com/coders. So, Mr. Dominic, when I was reading your review and knowing you too, like I know at least from some of our conversations, it seems like to get in your zone, to get in the flow where you're like in the Matrix and you're just piping, you're just right straight from the brain to your fingers. Don't you have to be kind of, aren't you worried about if the tools are frustrating you, it's going to kind of prevent you from falling into that zone? And it sounds like, oh, this is great, but when it actually comes down to sitting down and using it, it's falling short.
So I wouldn't say that's fair, right? So we're talking about the IDE in particular, Xamarin Studio. Xamarin Studio is phenomenal on Mac. There's nothing wrong with it. It's as good as you would expect it to be. It's not. It's fine. It's a very competent IDE.
And that's primarily where you'd be using it, I'd assume.
Right. So I do have my desktop workstation at my office is currently a Windows machine, though.
Go figure.
Another project. Well, due to another project. So you would think that Xamarin Studio is a cross-platform IDE. It would be fine on Windows as well. And I was experiencing a lot of very strange issues on Windows. Syntax highlighting was incorrect.
Oh.
It was incorrectly marking things as errors that weren't, and incorrectly marking things as valid that were errors.
I mean, even if nothing else, super distracting.
Right, and that's the thing. I spent like about an hour trying to figure it out, and it's kind of Googled around, and it's kind of a common thing because, frankly, there aren't many Xamarin Studio users on Windows from what I'm finding in the forums and in the community.
Yeah.
If you're on Windows, you probably have the Visual Studio license.
So here's what I was wondering, and this is maybe just me just still kind of in aftershock from OSCON, but it was unbelievable how many Macs were at OSCON. In fact, I would say it's fair enough to say, in a ratio, there was essentially no other manufacturer there. Now, that's not technically accurate because the sign-up booths and the registration booths had Dell laptops provided by the facilities, and there were a couple of ThinkPads there. But it was unbelievably skewed towards the Macs. And a lot of these guys are open source software developers. They're on the Macs. And the other folks that were there are IT folks that their company sends them because, to be frank, OSCON's like, to get the good tickets where you can go see all the sessions, it's like $1,200 or $2,000. So usually it's a company expense. And I thought that's for sure where you'd see the IBM ThinkPads and the Dell laptops, MacBooks. And we talked about this on Linux Unplugged. Like, it was unbelievable how many MacBooks. And so I'm wondering, did I just see a skewed reality, or is this just our developers switching to Mac OS X like in mass droves? And so for Xamarin, they look at that and they say, well, we're going to go after the largest percentage of our customer base. They might not be the biggest in desktop market share, but they're the largest in the people who buy our software. So we're going to go target for the Mac. Because the other thing that's interesting is there's specifically cloud-targeted Linux platform distributions now, like Core OS. It's getting a lot of traction. And they've just released a whole series of guides on how to build out Core OS, and all of the guides are using Mac OS X in the instructions for a Linux distribution. So what the hell is it? Is it just... Did Apple just like come in and just win for the developers in mass, or?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't say win because I know we'll get a ton of hate mail, but I'm just thinking like it is very Mac heavy out there, right?
So is that why Xamarin's doing it, or do they really think, or is it really if you're on? What I guess I'm arguing with is I don't think it's if you're on Windows you would just use Visual Studio. Because I think anybody who's building on something like Xamarin's doing, they want to own that whole experience. They want you to be in their studio.
I don't think they do, actually. One of their main features that they're selling to larger companies was the Visual Studio integration. Like if you take a look at their marketing materials, they have take a look at their pricing page, right?
But to me, that honestly just seems like, here's an on-ramp so you can easily transition to using us.
No, So I've used it with Visual Studio as well. I use both.
Yeah.
The Visual Studio integration is not shallow.
Yeah, okay.
It is fully functional, and if you have a Visual Studio setup, as I know many .NET developers do, where they're hyper-functional.
Well, and haven't they had some cooperation with Microsoft on some of that? Yeah.
Yeah. So
I'm looking at the pricing right now.
Yeah, and the per month is a little shady because it's not in fact per month.
Yeah, you pay annually, so it's $1,000 a year.
Last week they made the indie per month, but so the other problem is like if you are a company who has more than 5 people on payroll, you automatically don't qualify for the indie, which is very annoying.
So is Xamarin Studio just mono develop? Is it just
they forked it?
Okay.
Having used the most recent version of MonoDevelop, I can say it's significantly better than that.
Yeah,
It's a lot of the bugs have been fixed, at least on Macintosh.
Okay.
So you're looking at $83 a month, which is really what, $1,000 a year per developer per platform.
And that gets you email support. It gets you Xamarin Forms, unlimited app sizes. Oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting limitation. And so they will publish. You can publish directly from Xamarin Studio to Play and App Store. They do like.
I haven't tried the commercial store publication abilities yet in Xamarin Studio. I'm not sure that I would.
That's what they claim, and even the Amazon one. They say.
Yeah, there's some sort of integration.
That's neat. Yeah,
so the pricing rubs me a little bit the wrong way.
Yeah, a little high.
If not even high, it just. So why would you be using Xamarin and not targeting more than one platform?
Right, of course.
So why are you charging me per seat per platform? Why not just say it's $2,000 per seat instead of saying it's $1,000 per seat per platform?
Yes.
Because that was something that, when we did our purchasing, we had multiple calls with a very helpful sales rep from Xamarin. And it was something that I just kept getting tripped up on because, one, I'm not old enough to have paid for software development tools, right? Like, very few people are. It's not very few, but I can't think of too many developers I know, even 5 to 10 years older than me, that have actually paid for tools other than maybe IntelliJ. That's kind of a different thing, right? No, like paying for languages, paying for platforms.
Yeah,
that kind of died out in the early 90s. I mean, you didn't pay for Java. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm thinking like the Borland Delphi kind of thing. The old Oracle. I'm not sorry, what am I thinking?
Yeah, it's definitely old school.
Yeah, it's super old school, and maybe it's just because this is not the type of licensing that I'm used to, that it feels very foreign and very deceptive to me.
Well, it would seem to me that if they're going to actually make a product that can do what they claim, then it would probably take a hell of a lot of work.
Yeah. So it was interesting though. The reason they say they split it between platforms is some companies don't give all their developers both platforms. They'll just have the shared code base, right, which they use the portable class library thing in .NET, and the one guy who does iOS will have the iOS license, and the other guy will have Android.
Oh, okay.
It kind of makes sense, but not the way we work over at Fingertip. We're kind of all
right. One guy. So at a lot of places, probably you got the Android guys, you got the iOS guys and gals, but at Fingertip, one person could make the Android or the iOS version.
More or less. I mean, we have, the biggest separation I'd say is we have server guys who just don't do front end.
Nice. But can I be one of those guys? If this podcasting thing doesn't work out, I'll come do that.
Ironically, to my knowledge, they're all on Linux.
Hey, there you go.
And Arch is creeping up at Fingertip. It's very annoying.
Okay. Trap where you lose your freedom.
Watch out for that Arch, man. Once it gets you,
every time someone brings in a Linux machine, I get another Mac just to counterbalance you guys.
Right. Yeah, to even it all out. Nice. So you kind of started to talk a little bit. Are you shipping apps now with this? Have you shipped an app to a customer using Xamarin Studio and writing it in C# and deploying it to iOS and Android? And how does that work? So you said you don't write once. You say you can't write once and then build for either. So are you writing like a core and a top, or?
Let's get into that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm curious about that.
Our quiet but present .NET listeners will know about portable class libraries, right? What is a portable class library? It is basically a fancy way to say this code compiles to the CLR and it is platform neutral, meaning that you can compile it and then it can compile to like Xamarin, which they call like monotouch.android, monotouch. I think they say Apple or iPhone. I don't remember what the exact extension. It's not super important. But it could also be compiled for Windows. It could also be compiled for WinPhone. It could also be compiled for really anything else that adheres to that PCL specification, right? That CLR deal. Super complicated way to say the code is platform neutral. Now, in that portable class library, you have to be super careful about what assemblies you call in, right? Because once you call in an assembly that doesn't exist on all the platforms you're targeting, you can't compile, which is really obnoxious.
Yeah.
Because Microsoft has a rich open source tool called NuGet that has very, very, very few things that are compatible like that. Again, this is a side effect of probably Xamarin being new. And, over on the .NET side, the open source culture is kind of in its infancy.
So this isn't forcing developing for the common lowest denominator?
No, and here's why. So your portable class library would only contain like your database access, your networking access, your sorting. I mean, maybe we should do like a case example, right? Let's say you're doing a taskless app. Everybody understands that, right? It would have your data models. You're dealing with, perhaps sorting your tasks, your algorithms there, dealing with user accounts. As soon as you got into visuals or platform-specific stuff, you would end up writing platform-specific coding in classic Xamarin. For instance, if you had let's say a table view that lists all your tasks, right? So let's say you had a task for today view in this example. You would have two separate classes. One would be UI table view controller, daily tasks. On the Android side, you would have daily task activity. And you'd have to write those two pieces of code quite separately, right? 100% separate. But they would call into the portable class library for the data models, the networking, the database access.
And that stuff you can use over and over again.
Right, because that stuff is totally platform neutral.
Yeah.
So, you're making an HTTP GET request. It doesn't matter, right? Like it's fine. Though there is a trick where you have to be careful that you have to watch your threading a little bit. And, there's some things you really have to be, .NET is a big, big space, and you can Google around, try to do something in C# and get a lot of examples that will automatically crash on mobile because they use the main thread. So you have to really buy into the gospel of the await and async await thing in C#, which basically, how can we say this? It does asynchronous operations, but not necessarily networking operations, right? Though it is commonly used for networking. So let's do here's a trivial example, right? That HTTP GET response I was talking about. That should be an async await task. With opening a file, no matter how small the file, in Xamarin should also be an async await task.
Yeah, sure.
Which you might not expect it to be, right? Because you could get away with that in native iOS and probably in native Android.
Okay.
It's just a quirk with the way it works, and you just have to be a little more
cognizant as you're going about.
Well,
to
be honest, you shouldn't be doing any of this crap on the main thread anyway.
Yeah.
But it's less forgiving than certainly native Objective-C is, right? It is far less forgiving. So if you think something should be asynchronous, it probably should. It causes you to really think about how you structure your code, and it forces you to really separate your UI from your business logics. Because anything that's in the UI, you have to write twice.
Yes, right.
So, there's a common joke with iOS developers that, where's your code? Oh, it's all in the view controller. We just throw everything in the view controller, right? It's just, we're in the app delegate on a Mac app. Xamarin Classic, at least, will punish you severely for that by making you write everything twice. And therefore debug the same code twice, right?
Am I wrong, or can you also make a desktop application with this? Can you use this to make a mono app for? You
can use it to make a Mac app. Now there are rumors of a Windows 8 offering coming out.
Okay.
But the way they've architected this, there is no reason that they couldn't just keep adding platforms, right?
But like, say, because I guess what I'm thinking about there is, I like the idea that if we accept the reality that it seems like a lot of companies have decided, all right, we're going to make mobile apps like media streaming and stuff like that.
Right.
And maybe we'll make a web front end. And then what I'm hoping is if things like this come along and it really makes it possible to create desktop apps too, and if they're writing the UI separately, so it's designed to be a desktop application from a design standpoint, something that facilitates that could at least keep applications coming to the desktop. It's because right now it just seems like all of these companies and developer time and attention is really mobile focused, which it's like we said earlier, it's where the money's at. But I like the idea that at least some of these tools could be repurposed to make desktop applications too.
Well, they already are, right? There is Xamarin for Mac.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that the future of desktop apps isn't like Chrome apps still. I'm not sure how many native desktop apps you're going to have in the future. You might have like a lot of small utility apps for small developers like me, people like that, but you're not going to get, Spotify has a native desktop app on both platforms, but its Chrome app works just fine.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not entirely sure that, had Spotify started a few years later, would there be desktop apps?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, Pandora gets away with it for the most part.
Yeah. So anyway, the bottom line is I definitely like Xamarin. I definitely like where it is going.
Do you feel like it could give you guys a bit of an edge?
Well, I feel like it's a great tool in the toolbox, right? It's just another tool in the tool belt. Like any other tool, it is not right for everybody.
But isn't it maybe one of them? I mean, okay, if I'm misunderstanding, it sounds like you can reclaim an S ton of time and tell a client you might be able to budget lower than somebody else because of this tool. I mean, it sounds like potentially for the clients that are looking for multi-platform support, that usually comes at a premium, and they can come to Fingertip and they say, we want this, and you guys, if assuming the other guys that are bidding aren't using a tool like this, you're going to have an advantage.
So we find that we're bidding against a lot of HTML5 shops.
So they already are kind of coming at it from that angle.
Right, and they still tend to be a bit lower because they're kind of shipping PhoneGap and jQuery mobile. Right.
That makes sense. Yeah, that does. Yeah. Boy, that's a balls. But see, then you have to see if you can win the native battle, right? Is it you go that approach?
Right,
You'd be like, performance.
Yeah, the other thing is, like, I'm not sure how native Xamarin is. Like, technically, I've read the docs, and, it is certainly compiling to native code, and certainly, I mean, we've done some benchmarking. It is pretty much there, right? Like, no significant, no visible difference between a native app and a Xamarin app that we've been able to find in the use case of normal line of business apps, right? Games are a whole different story.
Yeah. Yeah, this is amazing. So 2 different posts to GitHub, and they've caught the attention of our subreddit and many others on Reddit. So it's not just our subreddit. It's in the drama, but everybody is. And here's the first one. I'm just going to read it to you, okay? Or actually just a couple of highlights because it's a damn fine letter, but it's just way too long. Anonymous writes, of course, just on GitHub, an open letter to Xamarin. Please stop abusing your monopoly. He says, I've been using Xamarin for the past half year, almost full-time, developing an application for both iOS and Android. Everything in this letter is based on my personal experience with this technology, and it goes on for quite a bit, so I extracted a couple of the good bits. He or she says, I'd really like to know what the priority is at Xamarin, because it seems that cool thing to demo is way up high, and working software is hiding way down in the corner somewhere where nobody sees it. I hope that someone at Xamarin is actually reading the error reports that Xamarin Studio generates. Does anyone there actually use Xamarin Studio? Or is it just something you guys sell and never try yourself? Throwing exceptions on undo and save is something no editor should ever do, period. Please stop adding new features and go fix some bugs. There are hundreds of them just in the UI editor alone. And he has a list here, an S-ton of null exceptions at runtime. Save doesn't always work. Undo doesn't always work. Android UI designer sometimes decides to F up the whole design. Then a second post. This one because of GitHub's spam system got pulled down, but I grabbed the Google cache of it so we can still see it, and I have that linked in the show notes. Second post, Xamarin makes me sad, my message to them. Here's the TLDR version. I love C# more than any other language, but Xamarin is horrible. I wish it were Mono, and I wish Mono were never invented. It's a disgrace, completely broken and buggy, and the most broken thing in the entire universe. But I still use it. Why? Because I can write for 2 platforms if it was one. Well, not really, but because I work on small apps. I don't have to write all the business crap twice. That's about as good as Xamarin is, and that's the only thing. They can actually compile plain C#. Hooray! If only the rest of the crap if only the rest of the expensive broken crap actually worked as advertised. If you don't believe me, just go to their bugs and look at their bug tracker and look at the mono release notes. Just look at the list of shiny features. Well, half of that crap is either broken or was never implemented or just doesn't work as documented. Everything is just a lie that should make it look good. Xamarin does thousands of things. They release new iOS SDK.
the same day Apple releases it. Wow! If only they waited a year and released a working version instead. They make thousands of cool features, but they're all broken.
So, I've been using Xamarin a bit, and so there's a few things here. I'm going to, little defense of Xamarin. I have not experienced any iOS 8 issues, anything like that in Xamarin, period. Xamarin.iOS and Xamarin.android are fine. Xamarin.iOS is definitely better by a pretty significant margin. In our testing here, Xamarin.android needs a little more TLC when you're working on it. It's not unusable, but it's you can tell that there's a preference over at Xamarin, right? That there's a little more TLC on the iOS side. But all in all, Xamarin Classic, as we refer to it, is fine. Xamarin Forms is a steaming pile of shit.
Wow.
We did a POC app for someone, and we ended up totally rewriting it outside of Xamarin Forms.
Really?
Because there is a memory link in moving from one page to another. Now, before that's so mean to talk about this publicly, people email me. I have been working with Xamarin for almost a month now on this issue, and they have given me the, hey man, we're working on it. But I think it's, as my team has been working nights and weekends to rewrite the app, and we paid thousands of dollars in Xamarin licenses.
Right.
I'm pretty sure that I would like to see Miguel stay up and his buddy Jason stay up as well.
Well, now, but doesn't this get back to, don't you think it's a little cheap to throw around the price? Because doesn't that get back to software pricing and how it's all out of whack anyways?
If you buy a broken refrigerator, you are entitled to a refund. If you go to a restaurant and there's glass in your salad, you are entitled to a refund. If you go to a restaurant and your salad's fine, but your soup has a dead roach in it, you are entitled to a refund.
Yeah, I suppose so.
You see where I'm going with this?
Yeah, I do. I follow you.
So half, in my opinion, Xamarin Forms is half of the product.
Wow.
I believe that everyone, because it's part of the value prop, right? Right ones, it's very simple enterprise-style applications. My opinion that everyone who in the last year has purchased a Xamarin license of anything above Indie, right, where you'd be entitled to Forms, so business and up, should be entitled to a minimum of 50% refund. And in my mind, Xamarin does offer consulting. They should be working on your customer apps and your internal apps to resolve the issues. These are memory issues that, in Forms at least, you have no way to access the low enough level to resolve on your own.
Right.
So it's not like, be a better low-level developer. I can write C++, I can write Objective-C. And ironically, the issues do not exist on iOS. So that goes to show you that, or rather they're not as prevalent and they don't cause crashers on iOS. So again, Xamarin Classic, wonderful tool. I have not experienced really anything negative other than Xamarin Studio on Windows being kind of flaky.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
It's pretty obvious if you're using Windows, they want you to use Visual Studio.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess it works better on Linux and Mac, right?
Yeah. Xamarin Forms, well, I don't know that there's a Linux version. Xamarin Forms is wonderful on iOS and totally broken on Android. And it's broken in a very sneaky, memory leaky way where you won't notice till you're at that 80% point and you need to start QAing and putting on polish.
Takes a while to sneak up on you, you're saying?
Yeah, and let me add some documentation, lest people think I'm cruel. I'm going to point you to the bug where they confirm the issue.
Oh, very good. Yeah, okay. I can toss that in the show notes too, so we have that.
This is where we get into, in the world of open source software, like if Rails has a bug, in my opinion, nobody has the right to bitch, right? But when you're paying what is a very significant amount of money for developer tools in today's market, right? You just simply cannot tolerate this.
Agreed.
And frankly, if I was Miguel de Icaza, I would be out publicly firing people, shaming people. There would be very, very firm responses to this.
I mean, I don't mean to. So this seems inevitable because of what the goal they're trying to accomplish is so vast. They are trying to essentially keep up with the innovations of Google, Apple, and Microsoft all at once.
But they're not, right? So that's the problem. On Xamarin Classic, they're just writing basically a .NET wrapper on Android and iOS, and that works just fine. I think Xamarin Classic is a great product.
Okay.
Xamarin Forms is the old write once, run anywhere. Except they released it as a 1.0 finished product, and there's this massive bug. This has nothing to do with being a fanboy on iOS, as people are writing in the chat, or being, foolishly technical. This is being shitty at managing your product.
Right.
You released something that you knew or should have known was broken. You charge people thousands of dollars for it. And when someone complains, you say, hey, man, we're working, but we have lives too. Sorry, go fuck yourself. You don't have a life.
Right.
Like,
We spend a lot of money for this.
And in my mind, they're legally liable. They should be culpable for any losses any of their customers sustained because of using forms.
Wow. It's that bad.
Hint, hint, considering suing Xamarin. It's that bad. Like, this is incompetence on a level that's almost mind-bending. And the fact that I'm still dealing with middle management is very disturbing. And that I'm not alone. That's the sad part about this.
So, I mean, I was wondering if maybe we'd read through these reviews, and because to be honest, when I read these people sound like they're being emotional and reactionary. I mean, everything has problems, but it sounds like the problems are severe enough that it causes you not to be able to deliver the product you've been able to you promised the customer.
Well, the problems are you were sold something, and as part of the price, you're getting Xamarin Forms, right? I have not experienced the problems that these people say they're experiencing with Xamarin.iOS and Xamarin.android. But the problem is you were sold half of a product, half of it does not work. And think about this. If Microsoft released Microsoft Office and Excel simply did not work, heads would roll. End of discussion, right? You know, the Xamarin guys love .NET so much. I'd like to see what Satya Nadella would do to the guy who said Excel was ready to ship and it was totally broken.
Yeah, you wonder too how some of these platform owners feel about Xamarin screwing the pooch like this. Like it doesn't make the applications.
I've heard the Xamarin team running about and going on all these iOS podcasts and talking about how wonderful it is. They're not so quick to go and talk about Forms though, or to go and talk about Android. It's really interesting. It's almost like selective marketing.
So it really is.
You're selling Forms as though it were finished.
Yeah, it really is though. Android comes second.
If you turn around and said Forms wasn't finished at this point, you would be legally culpable and people would be entitled to refund and damages.
Right.
That's what this is all about.
Android second, iOS first, and then they called it
Xamarin.android works. Xamarin Forms does not work on Android. And you could say, oh, well, just don't use Xamarin Forms Pages navigation system. That's the whole point, right? I mean, if you're going to use Xamarin Forms and rewrite native pages, then you might as well just write regular Xamarin or write two native apps at that point.
That's a good point. I mean, seriously, at that point, it would turn out better. And you'd have more low-level controls. And you'd have more troubleshooting capabilities. And really, do you want to be tied to...
What's really ironic is if you go into this bug tracker, or not ironic, but really indicative of how they think, Android's next on the hit list. I'm sorry, is there one of you?
Right.
And we have the full tool chain here, so we're getting all these great updates for iOS 8. Yeah, Xamarin Forms and Android is broken. In my mind, if you have a broken product out there, that's a showstopper. Guess what? Maybe you don't get the day one marketing iOS 8 release. You fix the product you already sold to your customers.
Right, exactly.
That's it.
Yeah.
You don't worry about, the new page detail view for the iPhone 6 Plus, the new extension stuff in iOS 8.
I gotta have it.
You do right by your existing customers. And frankly, you should compensate them for their time and their losses.
Yeah, I think the problem is they are extremely limited in resources, and it simply comes down to the fact that they're making their money because of iOS.
No, their problem is that their management is cowardly. That's their problem.
Well, maybe so. I think maybe that's very true because of the reasons I just said. But I think that's probably that's
right. Because here's the defense, right? Well, we're doing some very hard stuff. Great, then do it. If being hard is your excuse for shipping a bad product, do it as open source. Don't charge for it. And great, right?
Yeah, right.
If you're charging, this is a commercial product, that's not an excuse. Because you're not charging $5 a month. You're charging thousands of dollars per person, per seat, per platform, actually.
Mike's ready for a lemon law for Xamarin. All right, well, I got to...
I'm ready for some accountability. Instead of going on, Miguel de Casa, you want to come on next week? Instead of going on all the iOS podcasts talking about how excited you are about iOS 8 and about the new iPhones, why don't you talk about how you screwed about 30% of your customers?
I would love it if you wanted to come on. That'd be great. And we could have a nice chat. I think the question would really be is, I don't think that's going to fit into the marketing message very much, so I wouldn't be too surprised if that didn't happen. Not exactly the message they want to put out right now.
And it's pretty frustrating, and it's interesting that it sort of seems to be bubbling over for a lot of folks. Do you think it's particularly exacerbated right now because they've been so focused on iOS because of the new release, and so that's why there's so much cries?
I think that's hurting, and I think one thing is that Xamarin Forms, you can feel that they definitely rushed it out, and that there's a little bit of a narrative with some of the developers who didn't try it saying, oh, well, I mean, that's obviously the lazy way. Well, but you bought it, right? So you might as well try it.
Well, yeah.
It's like saying, oh, well, I bought this steak and salad, but, steak's bad for you, right? You shouldn't eat steak.
Well,
So eat the salad, and then you won't have any problems.
What seems interesting to me that I'm noticing is there seems to be a lot of problems that would be pretty obvious with some basic QA too.
Right. So how can you not go 4 views into an Android app and see it crash? Like, how the hell does even the most incompetent college-aged QA person not catch that?
Which just implies a total, secondary priority status.
It implies that no one looked.
Yeah.
It is the simplest thing. I bet you we could have given Dylan the QA job, and he would have done a better job.
Probably. He's good at finding those bugs.
You're like, hey, closed.
Surprisingly good those kids are at finding bugs like that. That brings us to the end of episode 194. I cannot believe how close we are to 200 episodes. Thank you for listening. CodaRadio.reddit.com is where you go to submit feedback, comments, topics you want us to cover. CodaRadio.reddit.com, JupiterBroadcasting.com/contact for direct feedback. And join us live, won't you? JBLive.tv, JupiterBroadcasting.com/calendar for the times in your local time zone. We usually do it on Mondays. Unless Mike is sick. Then it's all up in the air, so JupiterBroadcasting.com/calendar is probably the best place to go. Okay, everybody, thanks so much for tuning this week's episode of Coda Radio. And we'll see you right back here next week. Feel better, Mike!